I can't say when, exactly, I lost the habit of speaking out loud. I suppose it began the day I understood that any word of mine could be used against me, even inside my own house. You learn to measure the volume of your voice when you're surrounded by people who feed on your syllables, who decode what you say with someone else's hunger. That's why now, if you hear me, you'll notice I speak slowly, as if sliding each phrase across the still surface of Oia's caldera at dusk. And also because when I tell this, I still see the blue edge of the sea peeking through the white domes, still feel the dry breeze rising from a moody bay, still hear the hollow echo of my steps on the marble stairs that coil from my door down to the main street. I speak softly because that's how I survived. And because some truths only accept one tone, that of someone who no longer tries to convince anyone, only to keep the pulse steady. My name is Nicolás. I'm 54 years old, and for 2 decades my trade has been a very Mediterranean version of modernity. I import things the world urgently desires, things others have been packaging with centuries of patience. When I say things, I mean discreet wines, pale marbles with worthy veins, oil that makes no noise, and certain small watch parts that, when worn on the right wrist, can open absurd doors. With those, I built a business. Then a house. Then another, an apartment in Athens and a mansion perched above the caldera in Oia, with an infinity pool that looks out to where the sea becomes a mirror. Whitewashed walls. Old wooden beams. Iron lamps in a courtyard where the bougainvillea insists on a magenta that never apologizes. Everything clean, contained, arranged in the order I always longed for, objects in their place, papers that didn't shout. That's how I lived. I married Sophia late. She arrived with a learned elegance and a weariness I mistook for depth. She had once been a dancer, a deserter of discipline, and a young mother to a daughter named Irene. I came with calloused hands and a quiet vanity, convinced that love was a kind of contract. In Santorini, the sun makes complex things appear simple, and I was seduced by the idea of building a family in that light. I adopted habits that weren't mine: rose with ice on the terrace, the scent of expensive lotion on the towels, sandals left upside down by the pool. I accompanied Irene to the university, paid tuition and rent, secured a future I believed I was buying not only with money but with my own days. I wrapped watches in padded boxes to celebrate past exams. Hung family photos on the wall of my study, 3 smiles caught in front of the blue dome of Panagia Platsani, that church that always seems to be posing in summer. All of it, I admit, was typical of me: the need to provide, to hold everything together, to ensure nothing was missing. Strange, isn't it, how a man who deals in beautiful objects can end up surrounded by things that mean nothing? I didn't see it. No one views their own excess with the clarity they reserve for others. Payment soothes you, the gesture of signing, resolving, controlling. Meanwhile, what truly matters, respect, reciprocity, moral order, loosens quietly, like an old knot. The first sign was small, and like all small things, I underestimated it. One of my watches disappeared. Not just any instrument, but a submariner I had assigned a biography to. I bought it in Marseille, from a collector who smelled of blonde tobacco and iodine. I noticed out of habit, collections teach you to count. I checked the drawer, the secret drawer, the safe, and the other place I won't mention. Nothing. I asked without accusation, conversationally, did anyone move something from the desk? Sophia smiled that thick smile of hers, the kind that dissolves instead of answers, and Irene said no, that she didn't understand watches. I left it there. Days later, an old fountain pen disappeared too, a Waterman, the kind no one uses anymore. Then another watch. The fourth vanished without a trace. And I, the man who believes in rationality, took inventory. Reset codes. Spoke to the gardener, the woman who cleaned twice a week, the night guard. I wrote down names. Arranged the notes like logistical pieces. It didn't stop. I'm not proud of the way I fell into silence with my questions. Living with suspicion in your home is like having sand in your bed. At first, it's a small discomfort, later, you simply stop sleeping. I watched Irene cross the living room, phone in hand, that flick of her finger as if brushing away an insect. I saw her leave late, return early, vanish on weekends under the pretext of the library. I noticed the smell of tobacco on her jacket and a perfume that wasn't hers. I saw her with Hector more than once, at that boutique cafe near the end of the marble street that climbs toward Oia Castle, both of them gazing toward the caldera as if the view belonged only to them. Hector was an acquaintance of Sophia's, her personal trainer in theory, a man more disciplined with his beard than with his life and practice. There was something in his smile that demanded credit. Let's speak plainly, Irene despised me. Not as one despises a stranger, but as one despises an obstacle in a plan. She never insulted me, that's what her silence was for. In public, courtesy; in private, the gaze that erases your place. I learned to read it in gestures and in time. No one has ever slapped me, but I know how it burns: a quiet door closing, a question that never comes, and not now where you'd expect a thank you. The second fracture was not small. It's all in the reports of the Hellenic police and a brief statement from the Hellenic Coast Guard, who arrived by helicopter that afternoon because it was deemed necessary. Sophia died in the pool. She drowned. They told me she slipped. They found her at the bottom, her hair floating like a pale jellyfish. It was a Sunday in summer, 4:20 in the afternoon. You can confirm it by the way the sun hit the wall, drawing that oblique line that left the green hammock in shadow. Sophia wasn't alone. Hector was with her. And that's one of those sentences that weigh more when said just like that, without adjectives. He was with her, wearing a swimsuit, a silicone watch, and a phone in his hand. They say, and it's written, that he took his time before asking for help. He called someone who wasn't an ambulance. He walked twice into the shade and checked his phone. Then he shouted. Someone else called emergency services. The Hellenic police arrived from the station on the road to Fyra, too late to change anything. I wasn't home. I was in Athens, in a meeting with suppliers, discussing a shipment of Thasos marble that still, every time I see it, strikes me as unbearably white. I didn't stop to cry. With the same instinct that makes others press the brake at a red light, I turned into procedure. I flew back that night on the last flight, climbed up from Oia's Main Street, weaving through tourists whose only tragedy was finding a new angle for their sky. The house smelled of chlorine and damp. A young Hellenic police officer spoke to me with the kind of respect reserved for a man who can afford a lawyer. He handed me a page of questions. I answered with the coldness that came naturally. Hector gave his statement. I saw Irene crying without tears. The next day, the first article appeared on a local blog: mysterious death in mansion overlooking the caldera. And then an invisible, steady wave began to rise. I dislike describing what followed, but I must. Irene opened profiles, reached out to those she'd already been feeding, activated opinion columns, out-of-context photos, insinuations. Soon came the private messages, the veiled comments, the digital whispering. The businessman who buys silence. The controlling stepfather. The watch collector drunk on his own reflection. That kind of story is almost impossible to fight. It satisfies a thirst that was already there. The algorithm, that faceless animal, adores scandal with the same devotion the sea has for pounding rock. They accused me of murder. They built theories with the confidence of those unburdened by evidence. They spoke of my cold temperament as if it were proof, of my fortune as if it were motive. I kept measuring my words, but I moved my hands. A man can be sentimental, or he can become an archive. I became an archive. In the mornings, with the sun barely pressing through the balcony, I opened my study and began to organize my papers. Not the legal ones, those too, but the intimate ones: photos, emails, receipts, handwritten notes, invoices for watches, messages where Irene asked me for money for materials that weren't materials. I spent 3 days and 3 nights reviewing the accounting of my household as if auditing a company I had refused to see in time. Outside, people walked the marble street in wet sandals. Inside, the only sounds were the air conditioner and, now and then, the drone of a Hellenic Coast Guard helicopter circling the caldera like a persistent fly. I can't forget that detail. Every time the helicopter passed overhead, I looked up, and it was as if the same question hovered with it: what are you willing to do for your version of the truth? The answer was a website. I called it what it was: facts. No opinions, no interpretations. Facts, with a subtitle that read, Documentation for those who prefer the weight of a signature over the rumor of a finger. I made no announcements, bought no ads, sent the link only in a few discreet emails to those I deemed necessary. I uploaded scans of purchase invoices, each with dates, serial numbers, photographs of the watches on my desk with visible marks, and then the emails from Irene requesting money, and the receipts from discreet pawnshops in Athens where those same pieces, with those same serial numbers, reappeared weeks later, sold by a woman who used another name but whose signature I'd recognize among 1,000. I included correspondence with Irene's university, emails from professors, politely exhausted, explaining her absences, her poor performance, her lies about internships that never existed. I uploaded the messages, Sophia's travel itineraries, the hotel charges from nights when I remember her telling me she'd stay home. I uploaded everything, like an accountant of betrayal. I added a letter, without adjectives, stating that I had provided all documentation to the Hellenic police, that their investigation, if just, would speak louder than I ever could. I have no illusions, posting those files was both vengeance and armor. There is no purity in the acts one takes in the nakedness of grief. But there was purpose too. Truth should not rely solely on my word. It needed the texture of the verifiable. If they were going to condemn me on a blog, I wanted them to pass first beneath the hammer of data. If they were going to cast the cruel light of the networks upon me, then at least that light should fall upon the trash as well. The website was like throwing a stone into cold water. The first day, almost no one saw it. The second, someone shared the link on a watch collector's forum. On the third, a columnist who had once called me a man in a suit with no soul wrote a cautious but unmistakably different piece. On the fourth day, the university released a statement. An internal investigation had determined that Irene had submitted forged documents to justify her enrollment and her scholarship. She was expelled immediately. By the fifth, her lawyer, one of those who advertise on the radio with a voice that promises justice, filed a lawsuit against Irene for fraud. She had deceived him with fake paperwork and promises of payment backed by a supposed family trust. The irony didn't please me. I simply recognized that the disaster was reaching everyone who had thought themselves cleverer than the world. Irene shut down several profiles. Opened others. She called me a demon and usurper. Photos began to appear of the pool, of Sophia in black and white when she was young, of me in suits that never flattered me. I didn't respond. In my study, on the table, the papers took on an order they hadn't had since I was young. And then came the question that hurt for being so obvious: did I love Sophia? If I have to answer without theater, I'll say I loved a version of Sophia that existed in the beginning, and afterward, I loved the structure that contained her. What wounded me most wasn't her death, though that would have been enough. What broke me was the map of her absences I drew while reconstructing her days. Once, in the dull mirror of the dressing room, I looked closely at myself and understood: if you don't ask for the truth, it's taken from you. Hector was a man who never looked anyone straight in the eye. I sometimes saw him on OIA Street wearing sunglasses at 9 at night. He walked like someone already halfway through paying a debt. I saw him in my home too, in security photos I hadn't wanted to review when I still could, crossing my living room with a towel around his neck. I don't need to know more. The Hellenic police closed the case as an accidental drowning. The Hellenic Coast Guard filed away their helicopter report. The man who stood at the edge of the pool looking down at that body no longer of this world stopped answering questions. It's no longer my place to manage that disappointment. I've let gravity do its work. Santorini is beautiful and cruel at once. I learned that the morning I walked up toward the ruins of OIA Castle, the island waking around me. Shopkeepers raised their shutters, sunlight slipped through cracks, and the caldera breathed a silence you never find in winter. I stopped in front of the church, leaned my back against its cool wall, and allowed myself the weakness of closing my eyes. The murmur of the sea below shimmered like silver. Later, I walked down the steps to a moody bay, counted 3 cats sleeping on the ledge, and watched the young ones throw themselves into the water from the rock, shouting as if driven by a pure kind of joy. I felt the weight of the house against my back. That day I understood that the island is a kind of theater. From above, everything seems symmetrical, but below, the rooms twist, doors shrink, corners hide, secrets linger. My last years were like that. To the eye of a drone, a postcard. To the hand that has learned to touch the walls, a cave where the damp leaves its trace. I went back to the house that was mine, or so I wanted to believe. I entered through the gate and paused to listen. When a house loses someone, it sounds different, like a guitar missing a string. I went to the pool. The water, that day, was still. I sat on the edge and dipped my feet. I thought about what I had published, about the names now appearing in the threads, about the word murderer that a few still left, very sure of themselves, in my message inbox. I considered suing. I had the grounds, the wounded dignity, the damaged reputation. But I also had a weariness that had hardened into character. I didn't want to turn my life into a lawsuit. It was enough to have the truth in order and the quiet confidence that whoever has eyes will see it. I don't believe in morals, but I believe in balances. Every ledger leaves a final number. Mine includes watches I no longer own, a wife who no longer breathes, a stepdaughter who found her mirror in a man who, sooner or later, will betray her, as do all men who never learn to be alone. It also includes my own share of guilt, for trying to buy peace with comfort, for confusing elegance with ethics. I am an importer. I brought beautiful objects into my world. It never occurred to me that I was also importing silences. Sometimes I wonder whether I stayed in OIA out of love for the light or fear of losing sight of it. Sometimes I think we cling to places because we believe they can explain a life. They can't. They merely hold it up while the wind passes through. There was one last scene I'm not sure I should tell you, because it might sound like an elegy, and I don't want that. I prefer things at their right size. I'll tell it plainly. Days after the site went online, I received an envelope in the mailbox by the gate. No return address. Inside, a pawnshop receipt and a note, "Forgive me." The handwriting was Irene's. I did nothing with it. I filed it in a folder labeled Forgivenesses. Next to it, another one, Forgetting. There's no greater romanticism than that, to catalog forgiveness without expecting it to work. The university had already issued its ruling. The lawyer had already expanded his claim. And Irene, somewhere, was perhaps feeling for the first time the closeness of reality that texture things have only when they stop being desire and become debt. I saw Hector once more, one last time, on the side street that climbs toward the old windmill. He was walking fast, a bag on his back. I lowered my eyes. I didn't follow him, didn't stop him, didn't want his words. I didn't need them anymore. He must have felt the same about my silence. In Santorini, when the Meltemi wind blows, the awnings tremble with a force that reminds you just how little you matter. That day, they all trembled. I stopped to watch how, over the caldera, the light shifted from blue to copper, and I thought of a sentence I can afford to say now: truth doesn't save you, but it positions you. And when you're positioned, the blow hurts less. It's calculation, not comfort. You asked for real details, so here they are. The marble staircase that runs from the road up to my door has 36 steps. I counted them one sleepless night. The church of Panagia Platsani, with its 5-bell tower, rings at 6 in the evening with a punctuality that in winter becomes nostalgia. The main street of shops, where tourists fight for shade, ends at a lookout where people applaud the sunset as if it were a play. I myself once clapped, out of habit. The Hellenic Coast Guard helicopter, when it passes overhead, strikes the chest like an open-handed blow. The Hellenic police station on the roadside has, at its reception, a plastic plant with perfect leaves. Details, yes, but they turn into coordinates when you need to return to reality. I use them so I don't get lost. From all this, I began a new life without moving away. There's something almost monastic about continuing to inhabit the same space after everything has changed. I erased some photos from the walls, left others. I rearranged my watches, the ones that remain, without the spirit of a collection, as if they were people sitting at the table because there's nowhere else to sit. I sold a few. Not for money, for air. I cut down my meetings to what was necessary. I chose morning over night. I started walking, with rigid routine, the same route each day, from my door, along the narrow street that smells of fresh bread, to the edge where you can just make out the small shape of a moody harbor, its red boats, its stairs that still remember the donkey hooves. Sometimes I pass couples speaking languages I don't understand. I watch them go by as you watch a train from a bridge, without envy. Sometimes I sit at the bar beside the windmill, order a short coffee, no sugar, and just listen. The island breathes differently at noon. I tell myself then that one doesn't heal, one reorganizes. I won't mythologize the website. I keep it active, with its timeline, with every official update of the investigation. It obeys only one logic: more documentation, less noise. Its existence is my way of saying I accept the effects of light. I never meant it to become an altar or a pyre. I know Irene visits it, I can tell from the statistics that never lie. I know journalists check it too, when the season comes and they need a skeleton to hang in the cold corner of the screen. It leaves everyone the same, a lit room where you see what there is. No more, no less. Some friends drifted away quietly, as people do from a table where ugly things have been said. I understand. In Santorini, friendships are woven with long lunches and winter promises that rarely hold. I hold no grudges. Others arrived instead, quiet ones, the kind who ask without curiosity, who show up with bread and cheese as if life could be fixed with a plate. Those are the ones who matter. To them I owe the anchor, not forgiveness, but the anchor, that heavy piece that lets you stay in the same waters without drifting toward places that no longer belong to you. Of Irene I've heard nothing directly. Rumors reach me as they do everyone else, that she moved to another city, that she changed her name online, that she now works in a shop selling the same watches she once pawned, that Hector left her for someone younger, that he came back, that he left again. Pieces of a puzzle I no longer need to complete. A man learns to accept the wholes. The story of the one who defamed me no longer demands my energy or my answers. Some days I even forget her name until it returns, like the smell of chlorine when you lift the pool cover. Then I breathe, repeat the procedure, file the name, close the folder, go on living. I won't lie, there are nights when sleep won't stay. I get up, open the patio door, sit in the metal chair, and watch the water. The caldera, in darkness, doesn't exist, or not for the eyes. What exists are the small lights tracing the curve of the opposite island, the few boats swaying like toys. I stay silent until I hear the first murmur of the baker. And I tell myself there are clean defeats. This is one of them. My house is no longer anyone's stage. There are no raised voices, no false laughter, no urgent purchases. There is order. I wouldn't dare call it happiness, but it is a kind of peace, textured intangible. A peace that holds grocery lists, walks to the Fira market, greetings to the policeman changing shifts, who, with his habitual gesture of complicity, chooses not to remember my name. I think often about my trade. Importing is a bridge, it forces you to look at two shores at once, to recognize that beauty doesn't always travel by noble routes. After everything that happened, I learned to choose with a different filter. I'm no longer drawn to the shine of what I bring in. I care about its origin, its journey, the trace it leaves behind. This is not a metaphor, I asked for radical traceability. If a piece can't tell its story, it doesn't enter my catalog. Someone told me that would shrink my margins. Perhaps. But it will give me back my nights. In the shop, when a customer asks why one watch costs what it does, I tell them its route. I do it softly, almost like a prayer I've repeated too many times. They sometimes look at me strangely, but a few understand. When they do, they soften, and they buy what carries weight, not just luster. That's how I've learned to survive in a world in love with gleam. I reconnected with my distant family. I called my sister in Thessaloniki. We went to visit my mother at the nursing home, where the afternoons have a false calm. I told her some of it, not all. She looked at me with that blend of pride and pity mothers reserve for sons who almost lose themselves. She told me something that sounded simple: eat, sleep. I did my best to obey. I haven't discovered any new faith. My religion remains data, discipline, restraint. There's a humble comfort in that. Once you've seen the worst that can be written about you, you stop fearing mirrors. OIA, in September, begins to empty. Footsteps echo. Doors close early. The sunsets lose their absurd applause. By October, the wind reminds you that islands were never made to live forever under praise. By November, the caldera becomes something else, not a spectacle, but a geological truth that demands humility. That's my season. I walk slowly, greet the fisherman mending his net on a wooden bench. I go down to the port, talk with the man who keeps a notebook of every departing boat. His handwriting is beautiful, tight. Then I climb back. Count the steps. Sit in the courtyard. Breathe without memory. If I had to write down what I've learned, and I dislike that verb for emotions, I'd name 3 things. First, love without respect is too costly a luxury, even for those who can afford it. Second, silence is a tool, but not everything. Sometimes you must document your life just to stay standing. Third, truth, when laid bare, is neither weapon nor shield, it is a mirror. Those with courage will face it. The rest will go on loving their shadows. I'm no hero. I'm no victim. I'm a man who put his papers in order. It's less romantic than revenge, more useful than resignation. Sometimes, when I stay on the terrace at day's end, looking at the sea that tourists have stopped caring about, I leave my phone on the table and touch the rim of my glass with my index finger. I do it by habit, as if tuning an instrument. And I think of Sophia. I think of her without anger, the way one thinks of a tune that returns by mistake. I wish her silence. I wouldn't know how to offer anything else. I think of Irene, the woman she will be, or perhaps already is. I wish her the rough texture of reality. I couldn't give her more either. I wish myself a simple life, which is no small thing. It was necessary to look over the darkest edge of my own house. It gave me back another kind of light. Not the violent light of photographs, nor the recent glare of blogs, nor the inconvenient beam of the helicopter. A lateral light, a late light that enters through the doorway arch and doesn't make you close your eyes. In that light, everything gleams less, but the shapes become clear. If you see me now walking along the main street of OIA, hands in my pockets, collar slightly raised, don't think I'm carrying a mystery. I'm carrying an inventory. Less interesting to those watching from afar, but it keeps the boat afloat. This is my confession, told without shouting, with the rigor of a man who's learned that his strongest defense will never be a shining story, but the kind of facts that can bear the weight of his name. Anyone expecting drama will be disappointed. I'm content with what I learned in the silence of my study, while the caldera kept breathing in the background, that sometimes self-protection isn't hiding, it's turning on the light, and letting others decide whether they can stand it. That, in the end, is the only justice that matters to me. Because the truth didn't give me back what I lost, but it returned to me the way I wish to live.